Well, as we head towards World AIDS Day on the 1st of December, as we do each year, we today have a look at the sorry history of the AIDS epidemic from the perspective of someone from the United States. And we talk about the impact of AIDS on the gay and lesbian community in San Francisco at that time, and maybe also in New York City. And we check out what the advances have been that have been made in preventing and managing HIV/AIDS since then. And we talk about the work still to be done in this area. So my pleasure to welcome Kathy from San Francisco, and thank you for your time and for your input. Let's start by asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Sure. Actually, I was born on the East Coast, and I had worked in Manhattan for years in the early 80s. I actually moved to Maui, where I used to work for luxury hotels and sales and marketing on property. It was a wonderful experience, but my life had taken a wonderful turn, and I decided at 39 that I really wanted to be a lesbian when I grew up. So I needed community and other things. So I transferred hotel jobs to San Francisco. I moved into the Castro, and then that was about 23 years ago. I bought my tour business about 17 years ago. The lesbian I bought it from, Trevor, had started it in 1989. So a lot of history was turned down from her, myself, by oral history. And this is something that I feel is imperative to share on my work, because it's really built about inspiring and educating people on LGBTQ rights or no rights. And this is how we make positive social change.
And so tell us a little bit about that business. Let's start right there. So tell us what you do in that business. It's a walking tour business, isn't it?
That's correct. It is a walking tour, but I've actually utilized my tours as a platform to advocate for LGBTQ rights and women's rights and equality, period. It's unfortunate, the United States, most of us were raised on the big white lie. You see, only white heterosexual men in America, white heterosexual Christian men in America have equal rights. As a woman, I'm second class. I don't get paid the same. My health care is up to other people's decision. It's really, really been awful. As you might have read today, they're actually trying to protect same-sex marriages because the Republican Party feels very strongly in taking away rights of everyone except white heterosexual Christian men. And that our country's in a very dangerous time right now, leaning towards fascism. And that's why my tours are very important. It is actually sharing with people how I can get married, gain 1,138 rights, but I can still be discriminated from employment, housing, restaurants, movie theaters, library, and shops legally in most of the United States today. This was all news to me, and it's infuriating, and that's why we have to take our rights and our right to exist and love to serious consideration, because we have the power right now to really change the world, and it's all about human rights, and no one can remain neutral. We've been forced to take on these political things, and in a way it's great, because I really believe love is stronger than hate, but our country's going through some really bad white supremacy, and it's really standing up for democracy and equal rights. So how could I went from a tour guide to being a civil rights activist. Yeah. It's a very big thing, and it's powerful. So I really try to encourage people to seek democracy wherever they are and whatever country, because what do you think conservative parties are in different countries? They're white supremacists, and it's dangerous, and we're bigger than this.
We were in San Francisco in 2019, in August of 2019, and we were talking to some gay men from New York City, and they said that they felt unsafe on the East Coast. There wasn't that same feeling of lack of safety amongst gay men on the West Coast in San Fran, but it certainly changed our perspective. The last few years have changed our perspective of what we thought was a pretty safe and, you know, and enduring kind of set of rights for LGBTIQ plus people in the States. Is part of the problem the fact that lots of those bits of legislation are state-based rather than federal?
Yes. It's a whole different climate nowadays. When we were in the Obama years, everything was moving towards progress and humanity. And then Donald Trump unleashed this whole white supremacy, and it's torn our country apart, torn my family apart. It's serious, but one thing in New York, I have to say, the thing is that San Francisco actually is really a vibrant community of 45 blocks. And we are out all the time. We're gay or LGBTQ 24 hours a day. Problem with it, any other city in the world, you're only diverse when you go to a bar or a gathering, but you cannot be on the streets. And I say that for New York as well. And that's why when I decided to change my lifestyle, I couldn't go back to New York because there was no community. That's the one thing about San Francisco's Castro. We never waver. We are so proud of who we are, and we love being who we are. And that's, I'm not saying it's safe anywhere in the world these days until we get rid of this hatred. But it is a force that can't be reckoned with, and it's empowering.
So you've mentioned the Castro several times now. Tell us, what is the Castro? Is it what? Tell us about the Castro, please.
Sure. Actually, it's the largest LGBTQ community in the world. It's 45 blocks. There are no straight bars in the Castro. Everything's catered to the diverse community. There's rainbow flags all over for blocks and blocks and blocks, and everybody's welcome. So this whole community, San Francisco is always known to be very sexually fluid since the gold rush days in the 1840s. But this one man, Harvey Milk, arrived in San Francisco in the 70s. And basically, he single-handedly arrived in the Castro and created this community without any intention. That's what it takes to be a very, a civil rights activist accidentally. And that's what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He had a camera store and, in fact, lived above the camera store, I think, in the Castro. Is that right?
That's correct. So Harvey set up shop as owner of a camera store on 575 Castro Street. And out of his camera store, he started realizing there's a lot of issues, and more diverse people were moving into the neighborhood. I'm going to really say at that time it was mostly gay white men, some women. It's unfortunately still like that, but we are evolving. The truth is that Harvey showed up, and he started running for a supervisor, which is like a councilman. And then he became even more than that. And he spoke for everyone. And that's what, I cannot explain the magnitude of this man, but this is what makes a civil rights activist. And we compare Harvey to Martin Luther King. I mean, it's that big. And it takes a very unique person to do that. So here was a Jewish New Yorker, loud mouth, big mouth, and shows up. And because of his advocacy, and then paying attention to what's happening to the laws, this is what started it. And if it were anybody else, this community would not be here anymore. But there's something magical and invisible, that a force that still holds that all in. And even through the AIDS epidemic, when 50% of the people were dying quickly, this community should have gone away, but it didn't. It got stronger. And that's the spirit of hope. And that's what Harvey said. Hope will never be silent.
That's and there's that inscription on one of the buildings up near Harvey
Whoa.
Plaza, I think. Is that, if I recall correctly?
Yes.
So how you mentioned the Castro is very much a majority of LGBTIQ plus people, particularly gay men. How did it become such a safe haven for gay men in particular? Was that because of Harvey, or was it something else?
Well, I could just say sex, but I'll elaborate on that. All right. So this guy Harvey arrived, opens the camera shop. Do you remember years ago there was no such thing as selfies? Okay, right. So if you are taking intimate photos, someone's got to develop them. Okay. So now Harvey moved in. Word got around that he's developing intimate photos of men. So then a lot of men were hanging out there because everybody wanted to see the photos, okay? And no, I'm too sorry. And then he started thinking, hey, we need to get more, I can get more involved with helping our community, our growing community. So social media years ago was word of mouth, okay? And that's what happened. And word of mouth and more and more. And it grew so much that he did become a supervisor at 48 years old. However, he was murdered 11 months later. And by that time, he had about 15,000, mostly gay white men, in with him. That's powerful. That has never been seen before. And it used to be illegal to be homosexual or trans, and you get arrested or a mental illness.
Yep.
So this was still happening in the 70s.
Yep.
But he made us proud.
And he certainly left a massive legacy, correct? Like, still felt today in and around the Castro. Where were you living yourself in the 1980s and 90s, Kathy? Where were you?
Well, life is a journey, as we know. I started out as a very, very, very happy heterosexual woman, but magical things happened to me along the way in my 20s, and I became a very active bisexual woman.
Yeah.
But so I started out in New York, and I swear, in 1984, I took a job in New York City. I lived in Jersey, and my whole world opened up. I mean, really opened up. Ethnicities, religions, sexualities, and it was the 80s. Big hair, a lot of cocaine, and disco, new wave music. It was exciting, and everything was on fire. So it was really difficult for myself. Well, no, it was just part of my journey. So I was very bisexual in New York. But then I had met some girl, and I moved out to Maui, and going through that. But then I still considered myself a bisexual lesbian, okay? But I came to terms
Yep.
that I really needed to follow my heart even further when it happens. These things don't happen overnight. At 39, I decided I really wanted women. So that's when I had to get off island, and I moved to San Francisco.
Wow.
And the rest was history.
Okay. And you lived at that time in the Castro or close to the Castro?
I've always lived in the Castro, yeah.
Okay. So it's kind of hard sometimes to think back. We're talking 40 years. But can you remember what it was like to live as a gay woman in the Castro, that sort of community in the middle of the HIV and AIDS epidemic? And you were there from soon after that awful epidemic began, correct?
Yes. By the time I got to San Francisco in '99, it was different.
Yeah.
I have to say, when someone had AIDS in the 80s and the 90s or was gay, it was worse than being a murderer. Okay, it was so the most worst thing that could ever happen to you. So perhaps you know yourself, it was suffocating, and it was hard to be out in something, and it was dangerous at work and so on. But in I was in the by the time I got to San Francisco in '99, HIV was the stigma just kind of shrunk a little bit.
Yeah.
It wasn't the most worst thing in the world. People were living. So what was happening here was that you would see death years ago walking past you in the Castro. And then I can remember that in New York in the Village as well. So it was physically alarming. So people started dropping like flies. Cleve Jones, his friend Marvin Feldman died of AIDS, and Cleve decided to come up with the AIDS Memorial Quilt, which happened in the Castro. And I still bring my tours in there to see a panel of the quilt that is still displayed there. Yeah. But this was such a tremendous project because he was not only memorializing someone, but he was also trying to raise awareness. Now, every year between 89 and 96, they would bring the quilts to the mall on Washington and lay them out so President Reagan can see them. He didn't care. And when I got to San Francisco in 99, I was appalled to find out what an asshole Ronald Reagan was, because I used to be a very gun-shooting red Republican. I'm not kidding. And I voted for Ronald Reagan twice, and I was appalled to find out, hear me sitting on the other side of the fence now as a lesbian woman, on what he did, and he refused to recognize it. So by 98, about 20,000 people in San Francisco died of AIDS. That's a lot of people, but it went on. So who came to our rescue was Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi is San Francisco's rep, my rep, and she, for the first time in 87, was a housewife, and she decided to run for Congress. And her first issue was getting federal AIDS funding because her community was dying, her city. And no other politician, especially a white Catholic straight woman, would ever touch such a horrible thing. But that woman, are in debt to her because she also started the AIDS Memorial Grove, which is in our garden, Golden Gate Park. She actually not started it. She made it a national memorial. And coming up with our World AIDS Day, there's a lot of events going on there. So Nancy was a huge help. The other people that stepped in who were not wanted were the women. And the lesbians came in and started organizing blood and food drives. And this was a matter of life and death, because a lot of these men and other people were being turned away by the hospitals because nobody wanted to touch them. As you remember, they had lesions all over their body and in their mouth. It was bad. So the women came in, and this is exactly why our alphabets changed. It used to be GLBT. That was the original. But because the lesbians came in and the men during the AIDS epidemic, they felt by honoring us, they moved the L first. So it went from GLBT to LGBT, and now Q and on.
Wow, so much in those last few minutes. So I want to talk about the AIDS Memorial Park, which is part of San Francisco. I've been there. It's a massive space with lots of little nooks and crannies for people just to hold space and to contemplate and reflect. But also there are ground murals, if you will, bricks that have got names on them of people who died of AIDS. And it's just a massively emotional kind of journey to spend some hours in that space. But it's the first time when I went in there that I saw this plaque honouring Nancy Pelosi. And I was shocked because of all the things that you said, that he was this fearless woman who knew that she had to do something. And the president at the time, Reagan, I think took, he didn't utter the word or the acronym AIDS until September 1985. And so, it had been 4 or 5 years since the first reported cases of AIDS were found. And this person and his chief of staff, his spokesperson, would just joke about this thing that was, in all accounts, all other accounts, was so serious and gut wrenching, and yet they thought it was just a bit of a joke for the gays. So Pelosi has done such an amazing amount of work, as you said, as a white, straight Catholic woman. She had no reason to do this, but knew that it was the right thing.
No.
Yeah.
It could have hurt her career, right? She was running for the first time. Yeah. But that's how strong our community was at the time. Yeah. But, I actually did experience the worst part in my life of a coworker in New York dying of AIDS, and their family left the casket open, and to see a 36-year-old man look 80, and they actually had to paste a mustache on him so you have some recognition to the body in the coffin. It was devastating. The wasting, the aging, terrible.
Yeah, and it's a memory you can't get rid of quickly or easily, isn't it? The women stepping to the gay women stepping to the forefront, and trans women stepping to the forefront of the fight for human rights is a kind of recurring theme in America, and to some extent in Australia as well. And it, of course, happened through Stonewall and the Daughters of Bilitis and so on. Tell me how, I want to dive in there a bit more deeply, please. They stepped in because no one else was going to. Is that why they did it? Or is it something?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again?
Yes, so did the women step in because no one else was going to step in and help these dying gay men, or was it something else at stake?
It was. You know what? As you know, the men and women were separate at that point. Okay, before it was not a mental illness or illegal, gay women and men needed each other, because my girl and your guy, we can all go out together. We look like we're double dating. But once it would happen, and then once at some point, the men and the women said, "Hey, we don't need you anymore," and that separated our community. But the AIDS epidemic, the lesbian women were not wanted. I still get men on the street that still don't like women there, but old men. That's all right. Wow. Ignore them. But the women stepped in because their friends were dying, and they had to help. And as you may know, women were very organized, especially lesbians. So it brought our community together, and that was the very reason, because of life and death.
That separation of the gay men and the lesbians, is that still as much as it was before the AIDS epidemic, or is it's still there in some proportion, correct?
Yes, I swear, I had a neighbor for 20-something years. He won't say hello. And there are some, very few old gay men who remember when it was always men. So, and very rarely, but that I do have neighbors, and it's unfortunate because we all need each other.
Yeah.
Where would we be without our gay or lesbian friends? I mean,
Yeah.
but that's all right.
But
It's their problem.
the Castro was a kind of central point, wasn't it, of gay men who were dying of AIDS and had HIV, meeting up on certain corners just to socialise, regardless of the lesions that appeared all over their bodies and so on. Is that your understanding as well? The Castro was a really important place for socialisation in the 80s and 90s?
Yes. Most of us move here and we become our family. So there's always somebody who wants to talk, sit down, have coffee. We're a social community, and it's important that we sit and talk to people. So that's why we have a very friendly community, because we're very happy to be there, and we're happy to be around our community. And that truly is the heart and soul of our community, is people being open and happier and loving, as that loving.
And I think one of the things that makes that easier in the Castro is that queer people are by far and away in the majority. You're not in the minority anymore in the Castro, right?
Well, that's not entirely true.
Oh.
This is the interesting part. There's about 24,000 people in the Castro. I would bet that 50% are heterosexual. The difference is, Bronte, we're all allies.
There we are. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
And it can work.
Yep. Thank you. That's news to me. Thank you. You talked about the having a coffee or having some food with people in the time of the AIDS epidemic. Was that their greatest need, do you think, just to be able to see someone and have a quick coffee with someone and have a chat, or were there other needs that were greater than that, do you think?
Well, there's two things. Yes, even though there's internet and Grindr and all that stuff, we still have a need to connect.
Yep.
Okay. So I had a guy the other day, he was by himself, first time from Alabama, and I said, just go sit at that coffee shop, you'll meet the neighbors. And it's true. So people are more open. The other thing is that, generally speaking, we're a very pro-sex culture.
Yeah.
And thanks to Grindr, and always since Harvey Mills, there's a lot of sex going on. So that is just a safe place. And Castro, and being able to be sexual or affectionate, and it's all about connecting with people, whether one way or another.
And you'll find whatever you want to find in the Castro, right?
Right. Honestly, it's
true.
It's freedom. It's a place for safety and it's freedom, and to really be proud of who we are and to shine. That's the big thing.
Has that attitude always been there in the Castro, being out and proud and being able to shine and be safe? Those things have always been there in the Castro, or were there times, particularly in the 80s and 90s, I guess, at the height of the epidemic of AIDS, where it was still seen as a bit of a stigmatized thing to be gay, or there was a shame to be had about that, even in the Castro?
Yeah. Okay. The Castro was it started out when Harvey moved in as an Irish, Italian, Scandinavian Catholic neighborhood. Okay. It was cheap. So during World War II, a lot of the family's kids all moved out, bought houses along the East or South Bay. So now you had a lot of old places. And that's why Harvey moved in, and because of his personality and business, a lot of other gay men moved in and bought all these homes. So that's why it's that's where it all comes from. And some of them are still here. They bought all these dilapidated homes, and guess what? They fixed them up. And now they're worth millions of dollars when they bought it for $30,000. So the community has definitely switched to real estate. It's some of the highest real estate in the world now here because of this community.
Wow.
It doesn't exist anywhere else.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. What do you think of the next steps in, like, we've had medication regimes like PrEP that have just, if someone had said to a gay person back in the 1980s that there would be this medication called PrEP that will just change the way that gay men, their sexual behaviour, really.
Absolutely.
And it's been an incredible advancement. So to think 40 years ago, if we were told that, we would have said, you're crazy, because this will never happen.
Right.
But it has. What do you think are the next steps in HIV prevention and management? What do you reckon?
Well, this is amazing. I think by last year, the best of my knowledge, San Francisco went to a 0 new infection rate with HIV due to PrEP. Okay, they're heavily pushing it. So that is incredible considering how much sex is going on.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So bi men, bi women, and gay men are taking the PrEP. I had a girl on my tour says, hey, anybody in the Bay Area who's sleeping with men better take PrEP. Yeah. So it's really changed everything. So unlike the 80s and 90s where sex was being refrained because of AIDS, now it's not. And we don't have an AIDS crisis anymore. We have a monkeypox crisis. And that has taken over. But there's lots of vaccinations, but that you see the progression of viruses, I guess.
Yeah, okay.
And also, I want to mention Dr. Fauci actually started in the AIDS epidemic. Yes. And that's why he knows a couple things about viruses. I also want to mention that during COVID, the Castro area was 90-something% vaccinated because COVID was not our first pandemic. AIDS was.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So there was that historical kind of driver, I think, as well.
Right.
Yeah. So tell me, how is World AIDS Day celebrated in the Castro? It's quite a somber day, correct, in the calendar?
Yes. So what's happening is, as you mentioned, the AIDS Memorial Grove and the Golden Gate Park, that will have 2 hours of events going on. In the Castro itself, this is really an amazing project. They get the school kids from the Harvey Milk Civil Rights Academy, which are probably 2nd, 3rd graders, and the kids are on the blocks with chalk, and they want you to write a name down on the sidewalk in chalk, or they will do it for you, of someone who passed away of AIDS.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful. And then there's also a lot of other candlelight march and lots of things happening, and especially also around the Bay Area, it's happening as well.
Okay. And the Bay Area, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Bay Area is highly lesbian centric, is that right? Or am I wrong in that?
I don't know. No, actually, I don't know. Where are the lesbians? We're here and there.
You're everywhere, right?
Oakland across the bay. It's a really amazing African American community. So it's a pretty big community.
Fantastic. Why is it so important, do you think, for days of remembrance, such as World AIDS Day? Why is it so important for them to continue?
To continue?
Yeah. To have we celebrate World AIDS Day every year on the 1st of December.
The importance is preserving our culture. And, lots of times people die and nobody talks about them. And it's because it's too painful. And why the community still gets involved, because you are talking about an entire generation that was erased. And it continued on into other generations. And we have to preserve our culture and we have to memorialize these people. And that's why I tell people when I'm on my tour, you have to get involved in your community, whatever community it may be, because it's all about preserving our culture. And a lot of our culture is oral history. Years ago, they didn't record things because it was a perversion. So really important thing.
So the quilt that you mentioned earlier, is that still laid out on an annual basis in Washington, D.C., or is that just stored?
No, it's not. It is late. They do, the foundation rents them out to raise money, but they did have in June this year, they did have the 35th anniversary of the quilt, and they laid out 3,000 panels in Golden Gate Park. So my wife and I had gone to that, and personally never seen that many in one time. I've seen a couple hundred, but not thousands. And it was a very beautiful experience, actually, because every quilt is the size of a grave, purposely made that way. And all the names and pictures and so on tells the story of someone's life that was cut short by the virus. Very humbling.
Really important memorialization. And as you said, there was effectively a whole generation wiped out in that time.
Yeah.
Incredible. Yeah. Thank you so much for our chat, Kathy. I've enjoyed it immensely. What I'd like to do, or what I'd like you to do, please, is to give your business a plug. For people who are going to the Castro, they've got to take your walking tour. I remember doing it with you. That's how I met you, and I've still got vivid memories of things like the Harvey Milk School and the little plinths, the smallest national park in America, up in the corner by Harvey Milk Plaza. All that sort of, just so. What's your business called, and how do people get in contact with you?
My business is called Cruising the Castro Walking Tours. You can go cruisingthecastro.com and you'll find my website. You can check the calendar out, check out the tour, and see if it works. So thank you, Bronte, for really giving me the opportunity. I hope it was educational, inspirational, but it's been my pleasure to share this time with you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for giving us your time today, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.